Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest threats to privacy in the coming years?
I think one of the biggest threats right now actually is
Julia Angwin, founder of Proof News.
New York Times contributing opinion writer.
I think one of the biggest threats right now actually is to end-to-end encrypted messaging. So around the world, governments are trying to basically make illegal the use of encrypted messaging. And it is our last sort of private communication. If you don't have an encrypted messaging app like Signal or WhatsApp on your phone, you are basically exposing yourself to sort of unlimited surveillance. So we are in a situation where something sort of inconceivable has started to happen that we aren't noticing. It's a little bit of a frog boiling moment because we have the most amazing laws, right? If you send something in postal mail, they need a search warrant to open it. And that is not true for electronic messaging. We have not updated our laws to keep up with that. And so encryption is the only technological prevention we have right now for sort of like that last bastion of intimate communication that we want to keep private.
Hello, Julia.
Hello. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I was thinking about when I first met you. It was 2012. You had organized that hackathon at the Wall Street Journal, but the Wall Street Journal was really sensitive to the word hack, so we couldn't call it a hackathon. We had to call it a codathon. Do you remember this?
It was a codathon, and we had shirts. And on the back of the shirt, it said "not a hackathon," which was my favorite part of it.
Agreed. Has that organization evolved? Are you allowed to say hack at the Wall Street Journal these days?
Well, at that moment, if you remember, Murdoch had just bought us, and he was involved in the phone hacking scandal in London, and his London papers, they had been I think his reporters have been breaking into people's voicemail. So hacking was very sensitive at that particular moment for the Wall Street Journal. Although I have to say, I don't know of any hackathons they've done since then.
All right. Well, thanks for being not just a pioneer, but a singular pioneer.
Yeah. Some people have accused me of hacking the newsroom, but getting the newsroom to do the hackathon was itself a hack.
Right, and you're no longer with the Journal. You've started a new thing. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I've started this new newsroom called Proof News, and it really comes from the fact that I have a background in mathematics. I studied math in college, and I actually really loved proofs. And I loved the abstract math. I didn't like computation. I didn't want to do any number calculations in my head. I just wanted to prove things. And Then I also fell in love with journalism, and eventually it occurred to me that journalism was kind of proofs, right? Like we're trying to prove that something happened in the world, like either by witnessing it or putting together a lot of bits of evidence that show that this thing happened. And so I don't think journalists generally think of their work that way, but proof is my attempt to kind of get the journalism mindset towards proving things, because I think at this point, journalism has to prove its worth, and just being like, oh, we were there and we have a hot take. Everyone in the world was there and has a hot take. And so I think we need to distinguish ourselves by saying like, look, we have a rigorous process for collecting evidence, analyzing evidence, and most important part of proof, in my opinion, is acknowledging the limitations of your proof, because there is always going to be limitations.
Right. Well, So I hadn't really thought about this until your description, but you actually reminded me of the work of the Santa Fe Institute on complexity theory. I read a great monograph from there called Worlds Hidden in Plain Sight. The idea being that complex systems are really hard to analyze, not because you need a microscope or a telescope, but rather because our brains are just not well adapted for thinking in hyperspatial ways that you need. My experience of the news is mostly about giving me a superficial assessment of something that just happened. But if you're developing proofs, you're really trying to get to the ground truth of, I guess, bigger questions, right? Things that are more important than just what happened in the world yesterday. How do you choose what to study or what to prove?
Oh, that's such a perfect question, because I think one thing that newsrooms don't spend enough time acknowledging is that the choice of what to cover is the choice. You've already decided at that point. And resource allocation is the strategic decision. That is what the generals decide right on the battlefield. And so I think newsrooms are often find it easiest to follow the quote breaking news, right? Like, okay, there's a verdict in the trial, or this person was this. But a lot of those things are announcements. Some of them are PR. Many of them are PR. And in today's world, I'm not saying journalists shouldn't cover them, but the people making those announcements have their own mechanism for reaching the public. And so I think it's important for journalists to think about, when we are financially strapped, because the industry is in a state of total collapse. Revenues have fallen by half in the past 20 years, and even more than that if you look over a longer time period. And should we be dedicating our resources to like slightly adjusting the telling of an announcement that would have come out otherwise? Or should we be telling things that would not otherwise have come to light, right? This is where I love George Orwell's quote that journalism is something that somebody doesn't want published, and everything else is public relations.
That's magnificent.
So that is sort of my guiding principle, which is I want to cover things that wouldn't otherwise have come to light. So, for instance, I started Proof with testing AI to see whether it accurately answered the kinds of questions voters might ask as they're deciding to go to the polls. And I thought that was like a really high stakes question amidst a year where we're all concerned about what the effect of AI is going to be on the election, and on everything, but on the election in particular. And there had been no testing. No one had bothered to sit down and ask all the models, like, where should I vote? And can I vote by text? And there's a list that election officials will give you of the kinds of questions they always get, right? And many of them even have them as FAQs on their websites. But the models were actually quite bad. We tested the leading 5 AI models on it, and they were quite bad at answering those questions. We kept testing those questions over and over again, and I'm really proud to say that the models have gotten better. They haven't gotten better at answering those questions. They've gotten better at refusing to answer those questions, which is, I think, that's a weird thing too, right? The measure of success in AI is sometimes refusal. And so they have actually started saying like, hey, why don't you Google that? Or why don't you go to this website that actually has all the voting information? And so I think that's an important role that journalism can play. I think sometimes that type of coverage is not super sexy, but it's very important. And I think of it like garbage collection. It's an important civic thing that has to happen, but it doesn't mean that everyone is really excited about it. But you don't want to live in a city that doesn't have it. And I think that's the same thing with journalism, is that we also have, unfortunately, a somewhat of an entertainment model in our mind around journalism. Like, it must be entertaining and thrilling and support itself through for-profit subscriptions and advertising. The reality is that when journalism was succeeding that way financially, it was actually what I would call like the sanitation model project, wrapped in a bundle of entertainment that was like comics and health columns and fashion coverage, right, and sports coverage. And now that it's been unbundled, it's harder to support those core things, which is why Proof is a nonprofit and try to seek donor dollars to support it.
Do you think that, just kind of based on what we were talking about, do you think that with the rise of AI and deepfakes, that the sensationalized news will be less, people will stop listening to it as much because they will be so concerned about whatever might be out there that they're going to hopefully make a trend towards the more factual information?
I think there's like 2 hypotheses out there about what the flood of AI generated information will do to our news ecosystem. And one hypothesis, which I would love for me to be correct, is that there'll be a flight to quality, and that people will return to like brands that they know well or seek more validation of what they're looking at, is correct. Unfortunately, I think the evidence that we have about people's what choices they make when they are faced with this cornucopia of news from high quality to low quality, which we've seen basically in the past 20 years when the big media companies lost their sort of regional monopolies on audiences, and we're faced with all this competition online, and consumers had a huge variety of choices. I don't think we've seen that people are really discerning about choosing quality, unfortunately. And so there are a lot of websites that are not AI generated, but are essentially fake news that are extremely popular and are probably, I think, even to this day, the most popular websites when you look at the Facebook metrics of like what circulates on their platform.
I have this pet theory that you can tell how successful a newsroom is at arming people with a good understanding of the world. I think a good understanding of the world is one that is predictive. If you've got a very good model, it effectively predicts the future. You can get a sense of the truthiness of a given newsroom by how often the headlines assert that something completely unprecedented and novel has happened. So if you're doing a good job, like building out a framework that is literally teaching everyone like the fundamentals of how the world works, well then, a whole bunch of predictable things are predictable. If you have a framework that is very badly predictive, then you constantly have to explain the political news as being totally unprecedented. This has never happened before. But on the other hand, I don't know, like algorithms like novelty. So maybe the most popular frameworks are the ones that produce the most novelty and so are actually the worst at predicting the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an assumption in there that news is designed to predict the future. And I think what you're describing is that news has oriented itself to predict the algorithm. And like the reality is the algorithm determines what you see. And so the algorithms, as we know, are gamed towards outrage. They incentivize sensationalism. And that was true when news was on the newsstand too, right? Like the headline had to be screaming for you to buy it, but it was at a much smaller scale, and there were fewer of them, and there were bigger consequences for being wrong. The way that I am trying to address this situation of quality in the newsroom, which I think is a real question that a lot of people in the audience have, is actually through the development of an ingredients label for our stories. So if you think about when we came out with ingredients labels for food, it was actually when we switched from basically making all our meals. So you don't need an ingredients label if you cooked it and bought all the vegetables and meat yourself. But once we started moving to processed foods, there was actually a question: what the hell is in here? What am I eating? And so that's when the FDA in the 70s started developing nutrition labels. I think we're at a similar place with news. To be honest, like 20 years ago, you really had three news outlets on TV. You had your local paper and one or two national papers. So you kind of knew what ingredients were in your news. Like you might not agree with it because it was like 5 white guys deciding on everything, but you knew where they were coming from. Do you know what I'm saying? I actually think now it's impossible. There's so many outlets and you have no idea. And so I feel like we're in a similar moment where we need ingredients labels. And so I'm building that for Proof and hoping that others might adopt this practice.
That's amazing. Do you think that has also changed and that this trend has occurred because of data privacy leaks or advertising companies wanting to purchase data about the users? Because it seems like even though it was sensationalized before, it's just rapidly, increasingly more and more.
Yeah. I would say that a lot of people quibble with me, and I think, Michael, I'd love to hear your point of view on this as someone who worked in ad tech. But I have a hypothesis that ad tech, which is really the ability for advertisers to track your behavior across the internet as you go from site to site and build a dossier about you, is fundamentally what destroyed the news organizations' regional monopolies on their audiences, right? So if you wanted to reach someone in San Francisco, I worked at the San Francisco Chronicle. It was my first sort of big journalism job. You had to buy an ad in the San Francisco Chronicle, right? Or maybe you would buy it in the indie paper if you were like a club, right? But if you were the department store or the regional car dealership, you had to buy it in the San Francisco Chronicle. And it was expensive because they had sort of monopoly on that audience. Now, of course, if you want to find that, you can go to Google Ads and they will track a bunch of people and say, okay, we've followed all these people. We have dossiers on them. And whenever they land on a website, we can just pop up an ad for your car dealership, right? Or you can go to Facebook and like get a drop down menu of like San Francisco residents, age this, who like this type of car. So that is really what's destroyed the ad revenue of journalism, in my opinion.
I think that, well, I'll make the positive case for ad targeting, which is that it's been extraordinarily empowering for small businesses. I got to know the Association for National Advertisers, which I came to realize is a few hundred companies, 600-ish companies, that historically paid for all of television. Like if there's any TV show that you've ever liked, you have roughly 600 companies to thank for this. That sort of broadcast megaphone has obviously been dismantled. And when you look specifically at who is the best at ad targeting, arguably it's Facebook and Google, and then you look at their revenue mix, it's much less Procter & Gamble focused as CBS or NBC was. The preponderance of their revenue actually comes from small time buyers. So like surely that's a good thing, but the craziest thing about ad targeting is that it involves guesswork, right? So supposedly the individual reader is empowered, but no one is actually asked, hey, what kind of ads would you like to see? Who are you? What are you going to buy this year? Like none of us have that direct Q&A. Instead, the data science techniques to sort of guess about who we are, it feels like are completely out of our touch, out of our reach. So it can feel like it's been weaponized against us, and that's weird. Like that's obviously not what Tim Berners-Lee had in mind when he was designing hypertext to be not just about getting HTTP, but also posting HTTP. I think there was a two-wayness to this design that the present web doesn't have.
Well, I think that is such a good point because one thing that I've sort of always really disliked about ad tech, but actually just about AI and the cult of prediction in general, is that it is all about the past. That's how you make your prediction, right? You look at the past, you put it all into a machine and you say, make that line continue, right? Like that's essentially what it is. And I think all of us recognize that the past is often something we're trying to break free of, right? So yeah. Cementing it as our future trajectory is like the most depressing thing ever, right? It actually collapses any idea of personal growth, of societal growth, of change of any kind. And so it's an incredibly reactionary set of position. So it's a reactionary position when your ad follows you around because it's selling you the shoe that you already bought, which happens all the time, right? And it's a reactionary position when, as I've written about, like the criminal legal system uses a tool that aims to predict future criminality, which just happens to be biased against Black defendants because, of course, our entire system has been biased against Black defendants for the whole time. So I think I think this is a perfect segue into your topic of augmented life. Should the past be a predictor of the future? And what can you learn from the past? And how do you break free of the past?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of social pressure. I'm sorry. I think the right way to put this is that the null hypothesis in a lot of social systems is that perpetuating the status quo is a good thing. And that seems patently crazy.
Especially in today's
This is not the best world possible. This is not the one we should be enshrining evermore.
Absolutely. And I was going to actually touch on your reporting on how algorithms can perpetuate racial biases. And I wanted to talk about how that relates to the broader issue of data privacy and control.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you think about what is the information that's fed into these predictive systems, right? It's often data collected about you unwittingly, without your consent, or even if you did consent, it wasn't a meaningful consent. You didn't really understand how it was going to be used. So often you have to consent. Who reads all those terms? Like, click on the box. Sure, I accept, right? Who knows what they're doing with that data? And then it goes into this data market where there's resellers and it's all totally out of your control, right? And so what I'm concerned about is this idea, like for a long time, I wrote about privacy and the issue we call privacy, which I no longer call privacy, and I call data exploitation, because that seemed to me like maybe we could limit the collection. Maybe we could have some lines where we're like, hey, how about we not collect these types of things are just not okay. But like the cat is out of the bag. So essentially I moved to writing about algorithms and being like, okay, well, maybe we could draw some lines on like what we would use algorithms for. No one's willing to draw those lines either. So here we are.
I've been trying to make the world a better place for a long time. And a lot of my professional focus has been about making it harder for would-be exploitative people to actually succeed at their exploitation. Most recently with organized cybercrime. But now what I'm trying to do is shift to just empowering the individual. Actually, I think one of the reasons why we succeeded so rapidly with White Ops Now Human is that we didn't have this arrogance that only us smart, good guys have access to data science and machine learning. A starting position of ours was that hackers can do machine learning too. So we should not consider our machine learning capabilities to be a competitive advantage. We should assume an adversary that's as technically as adept as we are and find other ways of having a competitive edge. And now I'm pretty excited about arming the individual with widely accessible AI. I guess I'm pessimistic about regulatory reduction of powerful algorithms being powerful. And instead, I just want to see what happens when we make powerful algorithms available to all and we make individuals more sovereign and more powerful. Just reduce that asymmetry. I'm pretty optimistic about it.
I mean, this is sort of the argument that I really love from David Brin's book, The Transparent Society, which I think honestly might have come out in the 70s. It's a really, or maybe it's the 90s. I don't know. It was really early and so prescient. And basically he said that he's a sci-fi writer, but this is actually a sort of mostly nonfiction book where he tries to envision the future when cameras are ubiquitous. And he basically lays out two different scenarios. He says, basically, it's a really powerful tool. And if only police and law enforcement have it, we will be in a police state. So the only way to survive this technological change is for everyone to have it and for all of us to be surveilling law enforcement as much as they are surveilling us. And I will say that he has been proven right. The camera phone has been an incredible tool for the public to hold law enforcement and actually all sort of powerful institutions accountable. And so I think you have an interesting theory here on AI, and it's certainly what I embarked on this experiment with you about was for that exact reason. Could I turn this tool, which as far as I could tell was basically just big corporations stealing literally my work, like my books were stolen into this Books3 database that powers most of the AI systems, and stolen my work and monetizing it. So that's the current business model for AI. Awesome. And also, by the way, providing like inaccurate responses, even though they have my accurate work. So could we build something that gave me a little more agency and control in this situation?
Right. And reflecting that evolution that you were describing in better answers about the mechanics of elections. As we were building that digital twin of you based on the writings and interviews that we collected, I felt like we crossed a threshold when we got Pocket Julia to refuse questions. Like I really tried to trick it, asking how many anecdotes you need for good data-driven journalism.
Yeah, that was great.
And it rejected the premise. I was so delighted.
Yes. I mean, I do think, as I said earlier, I think AI refusal is actually a really important sign. I think that is where there are places the models should not try to answer, right? And getting to that point does feel like a little bit of a summiting Everest or something like that.
Yeah, right. It was a long journey. So we just had this, experimental design. Let's see if we can make a chatbot that sounds like Julia Angwin and importantly knows the corpus of everything that you've written. When did we start that?
I think it was June. Yeah, it was June.
Yeah,
Oh my God, was it a year ago?
Yes.
Yeah.
1 year anniversary. Should celebrate with the twins.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh. You need to tell Pocket Julia that she's a year old.
I wonder how it would react if we actually asked it that.
Right?
No, or told it that.
How did it feel watching watching this simulacrum come to life?
It was so interesting. I have to say I have a little bit of nostalgia from very early Pocket Julia, who was just a total asshole. Do you remember when at the very beginning she would just say, "Look it up yourself." Like, yes, do your own research. And I just really enjoyed that. But obviously it wasn't that useful as an actual tool. But I think it gave me this sense of like, ooh, I could be like that. I could just be a total asshole. Like, wouldn't that be fun? So then, but I still don't actually know why it was doing that. But I think as we managed to like load up more and more data into it, and it got a little more familiar with my corpus, and I think that was really interesting to me also to realize how hard it was to get accurate recall. Like, so hard. Even when we had constrained the data set to really my published writings, right? It just would like reach into other pockets and be like, nah, I don't want to answer based on the existing data. I'm going to grab some random fake stuff. I mean, the spider is really the best story. Maybe we should tell the spider story.
Oh yeah, you're so right.
Do we want to start with the backstory of the digital twin and then go into the spider?
Let's do it.
Okay, yeah. Michael, maybe you want to start with Julia?
No, I'm not. Like, you should tell the origin and early story.
Okay. I feel like because you and Julia had initially thought of it, it might sound better coming from you.
Okay, I'll talk about it,
yeah.
And then you guys can jump in.
Okay.
Sure.
Basically, Michael and I have known each other a long time. he was in town. He was like, let's get a coffee in between various meetings. We met, and you really had like, I don't know, an hour before he had to get to some other place or something. And you had just driven to New York from New Hampshire. And so we sat down. I still remember that I had the most spectacular tea with pistachio milk in it. And it was really tasty. And it sent me on a whole pistachio milk journey, but that's a side note. Anyways, so we're sitting there having this tea, and I'm telling Michael about like, oh, I'm starting this proof, but I'm also kind of trying to work on a book. And I just didn't really know what I was doing. I was like, I want to write a book about AI, but I also kind of want to do this newsroom. And I was in between things. And he started telling me about his thing. And I was like, I don't want to augment my life. Like, I have never been interested in augmenting my life. Just to be clear, like the whole quantified self movement, I was like, dude, no, I'm not wearing weird straps around my chest. I'm not going to do any of the things. And I had no interest in it. And I think the reason is, first of all, for some reason, that movement was extremely male. I don't know why, but it was just all about productivity and like efficiency. And I was like, I don't want to be more productive or more efficient. I'm actually very productive and very efficient. And what I'm looking for is a little more relaxation time. Right. So it never appealed to me. But then we started talking about it more, and I suddenly realized that this idea of like, oh, I could challenge power by trying to take power for myself, that was appealing, right? Because these tech companies have taken all my data, they've taken all they're adjusting what I could see, right? Like literally, they are my gatekeepers to the world. Their algorithms determine what I see, what I don't see. Even if I sign up to quote follow one of my friends, it still doesn't show up in my feed because I don't feel like it, you know? So they really control like the discourse, the narrative everywhere around the world in a way that is, you know, disturbing, and that I've spent my whole career writing about challenging. And so when I suddenly saw Michael's project as something beyond just productivity, but as like an actual challenge to power, I was super into it. Now, I don't know if that's actually how you see your project.
It really is. I must say, I'm really excited about finding this lever for a mass empowerment to it. My big theory is that mass empowerment makes people literally harder to oppress. So you know, I think like I tried to tamp down power of the would-be oppressors. Now I want to lift the power of everyone. And when you do that, you become literally unruly, as in difficult to rule. And that, you know, that's the world I want to live in.
I mean, that's what camera phones did, right? And to this day, continue to do. They're the most powerful tool for challenging power that we currently have. And if you can add AI to that equation, right? Because the other thing, as you know, Michael, is that it's actually, if you think about it, I'm talking about surveillance, right? Counter surveillance. And the thing about surveillance that is so frustrating is that it's actually really easy to set up like a sensor to watch something, or set up a little bot to watch something, but it's actually really difficult and annoying for humans to go through that data and look for the thing that they're looking for. And AI helps you do that, right? It actually basically lets you make sense of your surveillance data. So it superpowers the citizen's ability to counter surveil.
Right. An experiment that I'm exploring right now, just to try to create a concrete example of this, is greater observation, basically instrumentation of my attention, what I'm reading, what I'm looking at, which is the fundamental input into recommendation engines, right? Like the TikTok recommendation engine is phenomenal, as evidenced by the fact that like it'll keep feeding you really addictively. But with what outcome? Simply spending more time on TikTok, right? What happens when individuals are instrumenting their attention just as well as those social media companies is that you can learn about yourself and your life and honestly grow in new ways. Like how optimistic is your speech today? Like are you getting more optimistic? Are you complaining more? Were you inspiring? Were you a total downer? That these are questions that are actually trivially answerable with sentiment analysis that is already built. If the instrumentation goes just to you, because those are questions about how you're living your life that are perhaps deeply meaningful to you, are not particularly useful for serving you another ad. So it's only with individual empowerment that the incentives are aligned to try to use technology to like live better, to live well, to treat others well, as opposed to just literally consume more.
I was going to say, and also collecting it from multiple different sources helps that as well, because if the function is to serve you more advertisements or to get you addicted to a platform, when you have all these multiple different sources, then you can paint a more fuller picture. And Julia, to your point earlier, where you were saying, yeah, some people want to be more productive, but then you're at kind of the mercy of those productivity companies. But if you have everything, then you can say, okay, well, I was productive at this time, and this is actually what makes my heart rate lower and relax. And so I think all of these tools combined will hopefully be great for all of us.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because so much of like what is currently happening is someone is taking information about us and then essentially comparing it to everyone else in the world.
Oh, right.
And and so the comparison set is like, oh, you're happier or sadder than other people on Twitter or whatever. But actually what I want is, am I happier or sadder than I was yesterday, right? Like, I don't care that I'm like not as happy or sad as the people on Twitter, because have you been on Twitter? Man, those people are crazy. Oh, sorry, it's called X now. Whatever. You know what I mean?
In our hearts, it's Twitter.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. Not what's trending on X. How am I trending? How am I trending? Yes.
I mean, this is the thing, right? When you meet someone and they say, how are you? I mean, half the time I don't even know how to answer. I'm like, I don't know. Like, if I had like a thing that told me how I was, that would be helpful, because I don't even know. I'm just like, I don't know. I'm just trying to get from one thing to the next thing right now.
You're like, I am. How are you? I am.
Yeah, let's make that the new answer.
Yeah, I like that. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So self-awareness is a service, new software category.
Oh my God. Hello, self-awareness as a service.
The new SaaS.
Oh my God. SaaS. I need you to trademark that immediately. That is amazing.
So I guess speaking of social media, both Michael and Julia, what do you guys think are some practical steps that people could take to protect their privacy and gain more control over their data and feel empowered?
Well, I wrote a whole book that basically tells you that you can try, but it's a collective problem and it's hard to solve with individual action. But that said, I do think individual action is a little bit akin to voting. So opting out of things, turning off various invasive privacy practices when there are settings, is a way to express your displeasure with them. That said, we have unfortunately so many examples of companies offering you essentially false choices on their privacy menus while still doing all sorts of egregious stuff in the background, giving you the illusion of control. So that's the really depressing answer. Maybe Michael has a more positive answer.
No, well, I did love your guidebook, I must say. So I don't know, perhaps there will be a 2025 version that...
Oh, I know. So my book, Dragnet Nation, came out in 2014, so we're now 10 years out. And you know what is really shocking about it is it was really meant to be like a little bit of a call to arms about like privacy and data, and like they're using it for all these bad things. And I spent the entire book trying to opt out, trying to do everything possible, and kind of coming to the conclusion that like it was okay. I probably got it, maybe if it was a class, I would have gotten a C. Like I was like, I did okay. And I put a lot of effort in. But the thing that is so crazy is that when that book came out, I think a lot of people thought maybe I was like hysterical, or, it was just too crazy. Like, come on, it's not that bad. And it's so much worse. Like, it's so much worse than I predicted, that I would never have imagined, right, that facial recognition would come online so fast and so accurate. I would never have imagined that people were doing neural implants. Like, I just did not imagine how quickly it would get so dystopian. So I kind of feel like maybe I should do another one.
Yeah. I'd buy it.
Dragnet Nation round 2.
Yeah. What's the more dystopian? Is it Dragnet Nation 2, or is it like?
It's more than that, right? Because it's not. The Dragnet was like the indiscriminate scooping up of everyone's data, but now we're in sort of a targeted surveillance era,
Yes.
right? Where it's much more
Yes.
individual and just, and so it's like actually more pernicious in that way.
Right. Yeah. It's the Targetopia. No, that's not quite.
I think it's actually maybe the death of anonymity, right? I think that's sort of where we're at, because you cannot, with facial recognition, right? There used to be this sort of obscure, you could hide through obscurity, right? Like you could go walk down the street and like no one really knew who you were. And so it was fine if you're wearing your pajamas and you ran out to get a thing of milk, no one's going to film you unless you're like, whatever, Britney Spears or something. But regular people didn't have to worry about the kind of things that famous people had to worry about, which was like constantly being seen and recognized and having some weird thing that you did taken out of proportion. And now that is no longer true, not online or offline, right? Online, basically, it used to be that when you're browsing the web, remember there was that famous cartoon, No One Knows Your Dog, right? When you're browsing the internet, they totally know your dog, they know your name, and they send you a freaking email that says, I saw you browsing my website, right?
Yeah. Like, I don't want to purchase this. That's why I left the website. Yeah.
So creepy and gross. And we've just everyone's just accepted it, right? And that is also going to be true offline. Like we are, the police are using stingrays to identify your phone, and they're using facial recognition to recognize your face, and they're using gait recognition to recognize your walk. And so this is a chilling of speech, right? That I think is very concerning, because if you're in a perfect world of surveillance, it's hard to speak up, to dissent, because you're going to be targeted right away. And it's hard to build solidarity with others to create dissent, because even before you do anything, you'll be caught, right? And so this is the perfect world that like secret police everywhere, the Stasi in East Germany or the KGB in Russia, have always wanted. And we're at that moment, right? And this is what Edward Snowden said when he turned over those documents. He said, we're creating turnkey totalitarianism. And like the key is turning, you know what I mean? And that is really, really concerning.
Right. Yeah. There's something here about like the death of reinvention, right? If you're dragging the past behind you all the time. On the other hand, isn't there a social incident here? I'm reminded of Alan Watts, you're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. But socially, we act as though consistency is the only moral behavior, right? So, there's a lot of gotchas that are just about
consistency,
changing your mind.
Yes.
Yeah. So there could be a social antidote here where, like, turns out everyone's warts are universally discoverable, so we just need to get over that.
I mean, this is also an alternate hypothesis that people have always raised with me when I've written about data exploitation, that okay, we'll come to a era of forgiveness because everything will be known about everyone. I'm seeing no evidence of increased
does not
forgiveness in the
seem
world.
Everyone
surely
cancels
if we're
everyone.
going to take that step, there'd be some baby steps by now.
Right.
Should everyone just start canceling each other? And then at some point, it'll all cancel out.
If everyone is canceled.
Yeah, then no one is canceled.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be like a comedy roast. You sign up for pre-cancellation.
Oh, that'd be so great. That'd be great.
I'm about to be famous. Burn me now.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, so guys, I think we are coming to an end, but I guess I wanted to ask one final question. Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest threats to privacy in the coming years? And what gives you hope for a future in which individuals have greater control over their personal information?
I think one of the biggest threats right now actually is to end-to-end encrypted messaging. So around the world, governments are trying to basically make illegal the use of encrypted messaging. And it is our last sort of private communication. If you don't have an encrypted messaging app like Signal or WhatsApp on your phone, you are basically exposing yourself to sort of unlimited surveillance. And, we have an example right now of, the teenage girl in Nebraska who's in, I think, prison for having sent a Facebook message to her mother about the abortion she wanted to seek, which was illegal. And that message was turned over to the police. So we are in a situation where something sort of inconceivable has started to happen that we aren't noticing. It's a little bit of a frog boiling moment because we have the most amazing laws, right? If you send something in postal mail, they need a search warrant to open it. And that is not true for electronic messaging. We have not updated our laws to keep up with that. And so encryption is the only technological prevention we have right now for sort of like that last bastion of intimate communication that we want to keep private. And it is actually under threat around the world in so many countries. And it is always on the verge of passing I think we are really facing an onslaught against encryption. And encryption is what makes the internet usable, right? It is like the only reason that you could trust your banking transactions, that you could trust anything. So I think cutting into that is actually a huge concern of mine. When it comes to optimism, I have to say the young people, the youth, the Gen Z, they're so on it, like they get it. They actually have a lot of norms around, like they don't post pictures of each other without consent. They do a lot of disappearing messages. They have a natural, innate understanding of this surveillance world that they're in and how to navigate it and how to do obscurity, right? So what they do is they might post something that looks like they're at a place, but they were there yesterday, so there's a lot of techniques that they have developed that I think I think it's sad that they've had to develop it, but I also think it's great that they have an understanding of the threat, are doing their best to mitigate it, and I hope that they will support policies that make all the world freer for all of us and to limit data exploitation.
Nice. Great. All right, I think that's a good place to wrap.
I love it. Thank you guys so much.
Fun.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Fun.
And thank you so much for building Pocket Julia. I just had so much fun doing it. I'm still trying to figure out how to write about it, but I think I learned more doing that than I have actually in reporting on AI. Like building AI was the best way to understand it, much better than just interviewing experts.
Oh, that warms my heart.
Yay.
Also, one last thing. How can people follow you online, Julia?
Or
if
yes.
they want to subscribe to the Proof?
Yes, so proofnews.org is our website. I'm Julia at Proof News, and I'm on all of the social media platforms, God help me. Mastodon, X, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, Threads.
Wow.
I think I'm probably forgetting one, But what point is, I'm on all of them as Julia Angwin. So
That's
Yay, thank you.
thank you, Julia.
thanks so much.